Journeys of Hope. Life is a journey, and this is your spiritual passport. Where will the journey take us today? Let's walk together as we learn to become people of faith and hope.
Welcome to Journeys of Hope. I'm Angela Sealana, your guide for today's journey, and I serve as media coordinator for Pilgrim Center of Hope, which produces this weekly radio and podcast program. This is a time of year when you're probably seeing an Irish flag or two if you live in a country where the Irish immigrated, such as here in the United States of America. Like many, perhaps some of you listening, I have been blessed with Irish ancestry. Many celebrations of St. Patrick's Day have lost their connections to Ireland, and in fact, many of the beautiful stories and traditions that our ancestors once knew have been lost to time. I'd like to remedy that for you today. On today's pilgrimage, here are a few things we will discover. Who was St. Patrick? What are some Irish symbols, sayings, and places important to the Irish people? We'll hear their courageous story of keeping faith amidst hardship, and we'll reflect on how the wisdom of the Irish can encourage us today. Let's begin with St. Patrick because he is so familiar in name to so many. Perhaps you've heard that he drove all the snakes out of Ireland, or that he taught the people about the Trinity using the three-leaf clover. But, all of that actually is not true. He can seem quite mythical, foreign, and abstract. Patrick was, in fact, a real person, and he wrote down the story of his life as a testimony to his faith, which is where we got the majority of our information about him, not only as an historical figure, but also as a human being to whom we can relate. Contrary to popular legend, Patrick probably did not uphold the three-leaf clover as a representation of the Holy Trinity. He was not originally from Ireland. He was born around the year 385 in Great Britain under Roman rule. His father, Calpurnius, was a deacon and a municipal official, and his grandfather was a priest. Patrick was not a faithful youth, however. When he was 16 years old, pirates kidnapped Patrick and brought him to Ireland. There he lived as a slave, a shepherd, for 6 years. During his captivity, Patrick spent endless hours in reflection, and soon enough, his awe of God grew amidst his time spent in nature. Recognizing his past sins and mistakes in light of God's goodness, he experienced a profound religious conversion. Patrick described himself as, quote, a simple country person, a refugee, and unlearned. Because of his period of enslavement as a youth, Patrick always recognized that his education was incomplete. He said that he lacked knowledge and had a, quote, slow tongue. He wrote this about how his life changed from slave to free. Quote, one night in my sleep, I heard a voice saying to me, you have fasted well. Very soon you will return to your native country. Again, look, your ship is ready. It was not nearby, but a good 200 miles away. I had never been to the place, nor did I know anyone there. Unquote. Patrick ran away from his master and fearlessly journeyed to the dock. The ship was leaving, and the captain refused to let Patrick aboard. So he returned to the shelter of a hut nearby and prayed. Quote, before I even finished the prayer, I heard one of them shout aloud at me, come quickly, those men are calling you. Unquote. After 3 days at sea, the ship landed. The crew, which had pagan beliefs, and Patrick, who was a Christian at this time, trekked through wilderness for 28 days until their rations ran out. And the crew complained to their Christian companion, who encouraged them to turn fully to his God in confidence. Shortly thereafter, a herd of pigs appeared, enabling them to eat and continue their journey. Pádraig found his way home, and his family welcomed him as if he had been lost forever. At night in his bed, though, he dreamt of the Irish, calling out to him. This dream and Pádraig's deep conversion led him to pursue a new direction for his life. The exact sequence of events here are uncertain. However, most reliable accounts say that he had some personal contact with the Bishop Saint Germanus at Angers in Burgundy, France. Perhaps it is here that he was trained and received the holy orders. Meanwhile, Pope Celestine had sent Saint Palladius to serve as the first bishop of Ireland. He died less than a year later in North Britain. At this point, it seems that the Pope looked to Pádraig, whom Saint Germanus then ordained as the young new bishop of Ireland. Pádraig entered Ireland and had a first encounter with the Druids, which is quite a story. It was during the period of their fire festival, in which their priests required that all fires throughout the island be extinguished or else face capital punishment. Then they would light one fire for the High King, and from it spread the fire throughout the island. However, it is said that this was at the same time as the Easter Vigil. And if you've ever been to an Easter Vigil Mass, you know that a bonfire is the first part of the celebration and ritual. So Pádraig went atop a tall hill and lit the Easter Vigil fire in direct contrast to the wishes of the Druid priests. It is said that they sent their troops after him, but they could neither harm him nor extinguish the Easter fire. Now, Butler's Lives of the Saints asserts that while there is surely myth in this legend, it is clear that something momentous was decided when Pádraig indeed encountered the Druids as he assuredly would have, and that he gained some sort of perceived victory, which secured a certain amount of toleration for Pádraig's preaching of Christianity from then on. Maybe there was a physical miracle, or maybe Pádraig himself possessed some characteristics which moved the Druids to allow his preaching. And we know that Pádraig perceived whatever this was as a great victory, because it compelled him to write his most famous prayer, which is called the Lorica, also known as St. Patrick's breastplate. This is a prayer that, either in full or in part, I know that some of my family members have prayed regularly, some on a daily basis, usually in the morning. And you'll see why as I pray it now, as I read it. Think about Pádraig, who wrote this knowing the dangers that he faced ahead in Ireland. I arise today through a mighty strength, the invocation of the Trinity, through belief in the threeness, through confession of the oneness towards the Creator. I arise today through the strength of Christ with his baptism, through the strength of his crucifixion with his burial, through the strength of his resurrection with his ascension, through the strength of his descent for the judgment of doom. I arise today through the strength of the love of cherubim, in obedience to the angels, in the service of the archangels, in hope of resurrection to meet with reward, in prayers of patriarchs, in predictions of prophets, in preaching of apostles, in faiths of confessors, in innocence of holy virgins, in deeds of righteous men. I arise today through the strength of heaven, light of sun, brilliance of moon, splendor of fire, speed of lightning, swiftness of wind, depth of sea, stability of earth, firmness of rock. I arise today through God's strength to pilot me, God's might to uphold me, God's wisdom to guide me, God's eye to look before me, God's ear to hear me, God's word to speak for me, God's hand to guard me, God's way to lie before me, God's host to secure me, against snares of devils, against temptations of vices, against inclinations of nature, against everyone who shall wish me ill, afar and anear, alone and in a crowd. I summon today all these powers between me and these evils, against every cruel and merciless power that may oppose my body and my soul, against incantations of false prophets, against black laws of heathenry, against false laws of heretics, against craft of idolatry, against spells of witches and smiths and wizards, against every knowledge that endangers man's body and soul. Christ to protect me today, against poison, against burning, against drowning, against wounding, so that there may come abundance of reward. Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ on my right, Christ on my left, Christ where I lie, Christ where I sit, Christ where I arise, Christ in the heart of every man who thinks of me, Christ in the mouth of every man who speaks of me, Christ in every eye that sees me, Christ in every ear that hears me. I arise today through a mighty strength, the invocation of the Trinity, through belief in the thrones, through confession of the oneness, towards the Creator. Salvation is of the Lord. Salvation is of the Lord. Salvation is of Christ. May thy salvation, O Lord, be ever with us. Amen. Again, that is St. Patrick's lorica, St. Patrick's breastplate. It is a powerful prayer. And again, the latter portion is what you may typically hear referred to as St. Patrick's breastplate prayer, the part that is sort of without all of the burning and the wizards and all the other things that Patrick was expecting to encounter on his journeys in Ireland, as he was traveling and preaching this new faith, this new religion. But that last part, Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, and so forth, is what has been passed on the most, and what many Irish and people of Irish ancestry continue to pray today. And as you continue to read Patrick's work, and beyond that, of course, the spirituality of the Irish people is deeply connected to nature. You know, we heard Patrick speaking about the strength of lightning and the brilliance of moon and the splendor of fire and the swiftness of wind and so forth. Well, I remember my great-grandmother, who lived to the age of 101. She had a piano keyboard in her living room that she would like to play for us while she sang. And the one that she would sing most often that I remember, besides, the favorites of When Irish Eyes Are Smiling or Oh Danny Boy. The one that stands out the most is actually a hymn, How Great Thou Art. And although that song is not of Irish origin, it has continued to have a special place in the heart of the Irish people and people of Irish ancestry. It is basically the hymn of a person who is observing nature and is so moved that they cannot help but sing God's praises. And we sang that song at her funeral, and I personally believe that I inherited that quality, which I ascribe at least in part to my Irish ancestors, of knowing God's presence in the breeze and sensing one's part of creation when I'm out in nature. It's something that I have developed over my lifetime, and I thank my ancestors for that gift. That is something that Pádraig learned from his time in Ireland as a youth, and that's something that stayed with him, as we can see from reading that prayer throughout his lifetime. Speaking of Irish hymns, I can't leave out one of the most famous, which you may know as Be Thou My Vision. Originally, it was a poem, Rap Tuma Ballet, written in the Middle Irish language. That is the Irish language from approximately the Middle Ages. And it is attributed to Saint Dallan, who lived in the 500s and 600s. The 1912 English translation by Eleanor Hull uses the title High King to refer to God, High King of Heaven, which was a traditional in the ancient Irish kingdoms to use the term High King. The song ends with this verse: High King of Heaven, thou heaven's bright sun, O grant me its joys after victory is won. Great heart of my own heart, whatever befall, still be thou my vision, O ruler of all. Music has played an important role in Irish culture and spirituality. Wherever the Irish gather, whether at church, at home, or at the local pub, songs will be found. Songs passed on the ancient wisdom and expressed the contemporary consciousness. In fact, it wasn't until about the 16th century that written records of Irish songs were created. Until then, it was all passed down in community through oral tradition. Besides the usual instrumentals you may associate with Irish music, a most ancient tradition involves only the instrument of the human voice without any other accompaniment. This tradition, called Sean Nos, features a cappella singing of the Irish language. Ireland is the only country in the world, according to author Bill O'Neill, which has for its national symbol a musical instrument. Contrary to what you may see on popular commercial goods, the Irish national symbol is not a shamrock, but is the harp. It stands for the long tradition of Celtic rulers patronizing bards at their court. People treated the bards with the highest respect because if they included your name in one of their songs, then it was as if you were immortalized. Another name which is quite immortalized in Ireland is that of Saint Bridget. Like Pádraig's name, Bridget's name was adopted or added on to the names of both Irish girls and boys at the time of their baptism. Bridget's mother, who was baptized by St. Pádraig, was also a slave to the Scottish king of Leinster. He was Bridget's father, but before Bridget's birth, her mother was sold to a Druid. Bridget's story is quite remarkable and complex, and from it we can appreciate her spirit. For example, she managed a dairy operation to earn her mother's freedom from slavery. Bridget was originally to be part of an arranged marriage to a bard. She rebelled, however, and instead professed her vows as a nun. She traveled throughout Ireland, founding convents, as well as inventing the double monastery, a place for both men and women to dedicate their lives to God, united under one single superior. You will often see Bridget depicted in artwork as a mother abbess with a cow and with a lamp, candle, or a flame above her. That is because her name comes from the Celtic goddess of fire, and it means fiery arrow. Bridget is one of the patron saints of Ireland and a patron saint of travelers because of how she traveled throughout Ireland. Although Ireland is a small island, roughly the size of the U.S. state of Indiana, the Irish people have been known to travel to special places as pilgrims since the ancient times. Once, I had an Irish professor who spoke to us about what they call the thin places. Thin places is an Irish way of saying that there exist certain places where the veil between our realm and what is beyond our realm is thinner. Actually, the Celtic saying is that heaven and earth are only 3 feet apart, but in thin places, that distance is even shorter. Thin places become places of pilgrimage for people seeking encouragement, healing, or who are simply curious seekers. One survey of the country found about 3,000 water wells, which are regarded as thin places, called holy wells. So abundant are they, you could say the Irish have a monopoly on the concept of holy wells. The ancient Irish believed that wells originated from beyond this world, and so bathing or drinking from these sources could illuminate a person, heal them, or give them wisdom or insight. Early Irish Christians built their churches near these wells and would use them for baptism because of this tradition. In addition to the well or the spring itself, Irish rituals included a nearby old tree regarded as a sacred tree, as well as a hill or a standing stone. After partaking of the holy waters, a pilgrim would tie a strip of cloth to the tree, a symbol of leaving behind one's illness or woes. They would also rub the stone to obtain a blessing. In Christian times, holy wells were named after saints, and stones were carved with the likeness of that saint, which pilgrims would rub on their visit as a tangible way to pray to obtain the patron saint's blessing. To this day, the Irish people continue the practice of pilgrimage to holy wells and believe in the efficacy of their prayers in the thin places. Thin places often include trees, as the Celts regarded trees, especially oak trees, with great reverence. Their mythology taught that trees were the ancient ancestors of human beings, and that trees themselves existed in 3 realms. We could see how this belief came about. Its roots were in the netherworld, its trunk in this realm, and its boughs in the heavens. Other thin places include places of large monoliths or cliffs, as well as places that are associated with Christian saints, like Pádraig, the mount where St. Patrick spent 40 days and 40 nights at the end of his life before extending his blessing out over all of Ireland and passing away, as well as Loch Derg, where St. Patrick's Purgatory is located. And we have a Journeys of Hope program all about that thin place if you'd like to take a listen. The Irish wisdom of thin places is also shared by many Indigenous peoples throughout the world. Why might that be? Here is a reflection from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Creation is revealed as the first step towards this covenant between God and his people, the first and universal witness to God's all-powerful love. And that is from the Catechism number 288. It also says in number 1147, God speaks to man through the visible creation. The material cosmos is so presented to man's intelligence that he can read there traces of its creator. Light and darkness, wind and fire, water and earth, the tree and its fruit, speak of God and symbolize both his greatness and his nearness. Perhaps today we can struggle with this concept of thin places because activity and busyness and modern distractions can easily hold our attention in our day-to-day lives. We spend so much of our time indoors and connected to electronic devices rather than in connection with nature and admiring creation. And while this may not entirely be a disadvantage, since it has led us to technological advances and has helped us to overcome disease, poverty, or oppression in many cases, we also know that an overemphasis on technology can lead to an imbalance in our health and well-being as individuals, and in turn as a society. So what can we learn from our ancestors about the benefit of admiring creation, of being so present to our surroundings that we experience something that seems to go beyond our human comprehension or expression? When we come back with our next segment of our pilgrimage here on Journeys of Hope, our journey through Irish Catholic spirituality, I'd like to guide you through a little bit of a meditation, a challenge that will help you to grow in not only a healthier connection to creation, perhaps if you're especially struggling, but also to help you to understand more about how our Creator is revealed in the creation around us. Thanks for joining us for Journeys of Hope. Stay with us for more.
You're on the everyday journey of life, and sometimes it's tough to keep hope alive. Well, that's why Pilgrim Center of Hope is here for you. Not only does Pilgrim Center of Hope provide you programs like Journeys of Hope, but did you know you can also find other helpful media productions from Pilgrim Center of Hope on our website, pilgrimcenterofhope.org. Every first Friday, take an audio retreat with Jesus called Meet the Master. Every third Thursday, have a social with the saints. And our new quarterly series, Who is the Man of the Shroud, meets at the intersection of faith, true crime, science and medicine, history, art, and much more. Find it all at pilgrimcenterofhope.org or on your favorite podcast app. And keep hope alive in your daily journey. Pilgrim Center of Hope, guiding people to Christ.
Hello, this is Jason Nunez.
And Angela Sealana, both from the media department at Pilgrim Center of Hope, who produce Journeys of Hope. Would you like to honor someone special in your life and support the production of this unique weekly series?
We are in need of monthly sponsors for upcoming Journeys of Hope programs to help cover some of the production costs by a donation. If you've sponsored a month of Journeys of Hope in the past, we thank you for your support.
Pilgrim Center of Hope has a donation wish list, and on it, several months of upcoming Journeys of Hope programming are still needing sponsors. If you're interested, please consider selecting a month that you wish to sponsor by going to pilgrimcenterofhope.org and under the Give menu, select Wish List.
You can also choose to dedicate your donation in honor or in memory of someone special.
Thank you for joining us in our mission.
Now, enjoy the rest of your journey.
Welcome back to Journeys of Hope. Our journey today is through Irish Catholic spirituality. We're learning some of the wisdom of our Irish ancestors and going to understand how we can appreciate and incorporate their lessons for us into our daily lives so that we can live each day with faith, hope, and encouragement to persevere as they did. In our last segment, we were talking about the connection that the Irish people have long had with nature. and how in the Catholic tradition, creation is revealed as the first step towards the covenant between God and his people, and that creation speaks to us where we can read traces of our Creator in nature. And so the thing is that we live in this modern society in which many of us don't take the time out to appreciate that first covenant, that first trace of the Creator. And so in the spirit of our Irish ancestors, I'd like to invite and challenge you to consider taking some time. It doesn't have to be long, just 5 or 10 minutes at first, to be present to creation outdoors. For those of you who can't be outside or look out a window, close your eyes and imagine yourself there. Or if you're used to noise, entertainment, or listening to something else while you're doing anything else, don't worry. This exercise won't be boring. It won't make you anxious. Actually, being present to anything, but even to creation and nature, is an active process. So let's just go outside now, whether it's physically or in our mind. The first step to being present in this exercise is, what do you see? Take some time to name each thing that you see. How long might that thing that you see, how long might that have been there? How long might it have been alive, if it's alive? Now look again, but look closer. Notice the textures in nature. Notice the colors, the brilliance, the movement of living things. What patterns do you see? Now take slow, deep breaths. What do you think it is that you're smelling? Grass, flowers, wood, stone. And what can you feel around you? Is the air still? Is it thick? Is it thin? Is it moving? And how is it moving? This is a brief way of being present to creation. And it is, as scientists have now discovered, highly beneficial to our health. Our ancestors have known this for centuries. Another way of being present that the Irish have continued to practice, especially in the rural areas, is the Irish wake. After a person has passed away in Ireland, it has been traditional to hold a wake and remain with the body until the burial. Now, in preparing for this Journeys of Hope program, I had the pleasure of speaking with a friend of Pilgrim Center of Hope, Mary Jo Quinn, who recently returned from a trip visiting family in Ireland, one of many she's taken in her life. As we talked, she recalled with deep emotion the blessing of the Irish wake custom. Mary Jo's particularly remembering a period of time, as she's speaking to me, when she was alone in the room with her departed loved one, and how very special a time it was for her to have had that final time with them in the family home. Irish wakes can certainly be somber, but not always. They're traditionally held in the home of the deceased person or of a close relative. It's also common for folks who did not know the person well or at all to participate and to ensure that the body is not left unattended, especially when loved ones are in need of rest. In some places, daily reports on the local radio station announce the recent deaths and funeral arrangements in the area. I've even heard of such a thing as an Irish phone line that one could call to hear the latest announcements of persons who have passed. That is how important the practice of wakes are to the Irish people. So what happens at an Irish wake? In addition to the Catholic custom of the praying of the Rosary, which in this case is done at midnight as well as in the morning, it is also customary to enjoy food and drink, merriment, and to exchange stories. Both in the Catholic faith as well as in the old Celtic faith, death has never been perceived as a finality, but rather the beginning of life in another realm. Although my family hasn't lived in Ireland since the late 1800s, I'm grateful that that same attitude and spirit has been passed on to me. I never remember a death in our family feeling like the end of the world, as I later observed as an adult attending friends' funerals. In our family, they were always a very special time with loved ones, prayer, meals, and lots of laughter and stories to share. On that note, some of my most vivid memories as a child are from the vantage point of sitting on the floor in the living room of my grandparents' house during a large family gathering while 2 or 3 stories were being exchanged at once by my aunts and uncles. The Irish wake allows the community to be present to the loved ones of the deceased in a very human and personal way, which perhaps we have lost today. An Irish wake takes time, just as grieving takes time. Traditionally, the clocks in the house of the deceased are stopped at the time of the person's death. To me, this speaks tremendously to what happens in our experience when a person passes on. Time seems to stop. But in our modern society, time rushes on, and perhaps we struggle to catch up, because today it is uncommon to take significant time to mourn or to be present as a community to someone who has suffered loss. When the worldwide pandemic hit, societal and economic expectations often meant that many returned to work immediately or very soon after the loss of a loved one. In Irish tradition, however, wakes literally stop the clock and allow family and friends a communal and individual time to be supported during a grieving period. The Catholic Church, in keeping with the ancient Jewish tradition, teaches that praying for and burying the dead are great acts of mercy. On the coffins or headstones of the Irish, you may see several symbols. Some of the most sacred symbols to the Irish are called Celtic knots, which are lines drawn or etched in a design that has no clear beginning or ending. Celtic knots are of various types and symbolize eternity, eternal values or accomplishments, interconnected relationships, and can also symbolize the wearer's place in eternity. Popular knots include the Celtic cross, as well as the triquetra, which is now often used to represent the Christian Holy Trinity, but has existed for thousands of years. Now, the Irish people are very well accustomed with death. We have had quite a journey thus far, but now we're going to learn from the Irish about overcoming unthinkable hardships and how we can apply those lessons to our own daily lives. Before we begin, a reminder about 2 particular terms, Irish and Gaelic. Irish is a nationality, a person from the island of Ireland. Irish is also the name of that country's native language. In short, Irish refers to things specifically pertaining to the island nation itself. Gaelic, on the other hand, is a word to describe the broader ancient culture of the Gaels, the people who lived primarily in present-day Ireland and Scotland, and who ruled until the Protestant English takeover. The Gaels were members of the yet broader group called the Celts, or Celtic people, which is the Indo-European ethnic group that also included, for example, the Gauls and the Galatians. So on a larger scale, we have the Celts, or what is Celtic, then more specifically the Gaels, or what is Gaelic, and then more specifically even is the Irish. Catholic Christianity came to Ireland sometime before Pádraig in the 400s and spread through the preaching and the example of Christians' lives. If you had Irish ancestors or contemporary Irish family, you might naturally think of certain things, practices, or attitudes when you think of Irish Christianity. But it is important to note that Irish Christianity, for the most part, was actually quite different originally compared to the more recent Catholic Church in Ireland. In the mid to late 1800s and early 1900s, devotions and religious attitudes were imported into Ireland from other places, such as the Sacred Heart devotion from France, for example. Originally, Irish Catholicism was actually quite more Irish in quality. So probably if your ancestors emigrated from Ireland in the days of the potato famine, their faith would have been very tied to their Irish heritage and identity. So let's start at the beginning, a bit before St. Patrick's famous life in the 400s. The earliest Irish Christians would establish what were essentially community centers for people to live and grow together in their faith and culture. St. Patrick himself would bring with him, when he traveled, about 24 up to 100 people to establish a new community like this. Everyone from craftsfolk to cooks, smiths, brewers, and more would be part of this establishment. Christians also established monasteries where they devoted themselves to prayer and education. One of the most famous products of the monasteries is the Book of Kells, which is an illuminated gospel manuscript created in the 800s that includes beautiful illustrations and Celtic illuminations, meaning decorations drawn around the pages, such as Celtic knot designs. Many Irish monasteries had leadership whose positions were inherited among a particular family clan and protected by a Gaelic king. This is all to paint you a picture of how closely related were the family clans, their ties to the land, and the Irish Catholic faith, cultural and communal life. All of that began to change with England's King Henry VIII. In 1534, King Henry VIII of England broke away from the Catholic Church after the Pope refused his reasons for wanting to annul his marriage to his wife. So Henry set up the Church of England, of which he made himself the supreme head. This is when Irish Catholics began to feel the strong hand of England suppress their ability to be fully Catholic and fully Irish, as the Church of England preferred to reign supreme. Now, of course, this overview I'm going to be providing is painted with enormously wide strokes, while the actual history is much more detailed, nuanced, and complex. What we're doing here is getting a sense of the experience of Irish Catholic people themselves and how families would have been affected. In 1607, the Gaelic earls, whose families had ruled over Ireland for centuries, fled Ireland due to increased pressure from England, and shortly thereafter, England sent Protestants to begin settling on formerly Catholic property. In the middle of that century, English statesman Oliver Cromwell and his armies enforced the Ascendancy Act, which took over most of the land owned by Catholics and placed it in the hands of Protestants, and Catholic churches were also destroyed at this time. Have you ever wondered why the Irish flag contains both orange and green? It is a remembrance of this long history between the Protestants and the Catholics. Protestants represented by orange due to the leadership of William of Orange in the 1600s, and green representing the native Irish Catholics who rose up in defense of their freedoms as the English attempted to wipe out Irish Catholic culture, religion, language, and in fact their very lives. The worst of this began in 1695 when the Irish Parliament, led by Protestants at the time, enacted the first set of penal laws to oppress Irish Catholics. More laws would continue to be added as the years went on, removing Irish Catholics' land, their education, and their right to educate their children, or even if they could afford it, to send their children out of the country to be educated. The penal laws made it illegal for Irish Catholics to own public office, to vote. They couldn't even own a horse that was worth more than £5. For over 100 years, these laws kept Catholics from holding a profession of value or stature in society, such as lawyer or teacher. By the year 1800, the Irish language was extinct among people who held political, social, or economic power. It was the language of the common people only, and it was greatly suppressed. On top of this, in 1741, there was a famine in Ireland which is not often discussed outside of the country. This was different from the great famine of the 19th century. In this 18th century famine, over 300,000 people lost their lives. Now, to begin an important point to understand how Irish families would have been affected at this time. They were mostly poor, affected by famine, and so in these times they would have clung to their faith. But included in the penal laws were rules removing Irish Catholics' religious freedom. It was illegal to print or distribute any materials about the Catholic faith, to teach the Catholic faith, or to express or participate in the Catholic faith. When Catholic priests refused to take an oath to the Queen and denounce their Catholic creed, they risked severe penalties, including mutilation and execution. All of this is why the Irish began to celebrate their faith in secret. Priests would travel in disguise as they were hunted not only by the British redcoats, but also by hired priest hunters. Irish Catholics would gather in a hollow or a glen, an area which was hidden away by the natural environment. Lookouts would be posted on the hills to keep watch. Mass was celebrated at what was referred to as the Mass Rock or the Mass Tree, where rocks were used as altars. As we mentioned in our last segment, rocks and trees were very important and sacred for the Irish in their native spirituality, and this continued as they practiced their Catholic faith. Sometimes secret mass gatherings occurred in the middle of the night, and as you might imagine, many of them ended in tragedy. Families throughout the centuries continue to pass on stories about these difficult times, and today many communities in Ireland have banded together to create memorials at their local Mass Rock and Mass Tree, as well as celebrating Mass there at least once a year to pass on the legacy of these places to future generations. The places where the Irish resisted against attempts to wipe out their religion, culture, and language. I'd like to now share with you a poem about one of these secret masses, which was written by the Irish poet Sean McFerrish. We'll post the original as well as the English translation on our website for you to review, and you can find that at pilgrimcenterofhope.org and look for Journeys of Hope. The poem is entitled, Here in the Middle of the Valley. This translation is given to us by Patricia Scarry. The Mass was read and everything done, and God's people were scattering, when a noise was heard coming in our direction, here in the middle of the valley. What is that noise towards us? It's the pounding of horses' hooves. Here come the soldiers of the king's army, here in the middle of the valley. The old man Brian O'Lee turned and walked towards the priest, and he whispered in his ear, here in the middle of the valley. O Father Sean, here come the redcoats, you cannot escape now, here in the middle of the valley. You are young, Father Sean, I am at the end of my life. Swap your clothes with me now, here in the middle of the valley. The clothes were swapped hastily, against the priest's will, and he shed big sorrowful tears, here in the middle of the valley. The English captured Brian O'Lee, and the priest went free. They hanged Brian from a tall high tree, here in the middle of the valley. But the fame of the brave old man will live as long as grass grows on the earth. His story will forever be told by men of destiny, here in the middle of the valley. Again, that poem by Irish poet Sean McFerrish, telling a story of perseverance of the Irish people to save their faith and culture amidst English Protestant persecution. Many of the Irish people's rights were restored in the late 1700s, but the penal laws were not formally repealed until 1829. And as you probably know, shortly thereafter followed the Great Famine of 1845 to 1852, also known as the Potato Famine, which affected most of all the Irish Catholics, who, because of the Protestant takeover, had been forced to poor areas which were suitable only for the potato crop. But when those crops were affected by disease, the Irish Catholic population was just barely surviving. They fled and sought refuge in the United States of America, other nations, on ships that were referred to as coffin ships because the journey was so dangerous. They carried nearly 2 million people from Ireland to North America and Australia between 1845 and 1855. Another 750,000 fled to nearby Britain. And because of financial and physical tolls taken on this journey, large families were often forced to separate themselves, a father leaving with elder children at first, and then another group of the family, and then another group. Upon arriving in the U.S., many Irish Catholics experienced the brunt of anti-Catholic persecution, which was alive and well in this country at the time. For example, according to the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum in 1854, the political party known as the Know Nothing Party took control of the Massachusetts legislature and passed laws barring Catholics from being buried in public cemeteries and required children in public schools to read from the Protestant Bible. Anti-Catholics raided parochial schools and convents and denied church officials any control over their own property. So we can see the story of many Irish Catholic families was one of tragedy and trial, one after the next. And we might say, well, how did they have hope enough to believe in something better for them beyond what they could not see? And that answer is quite complicated, of course. But let's look at some general themes. One of the chief qualities would have been, as expressed by Richard Cardinal Cushing in his book, St. Patrick and the Irish, the Irish faith reaches below the surface and burns deeply into the heart. It is a way of life, not an outward garment that, like a best suit, is worn only on Sundays. So after reviewing the stories of many Irish Americans, a common thread that I can see is memories of parents and grandparents who set an example of constant prayer for their children. And this doesn't just include Mass and the Rosary, although that would have been of great importance. But many people express memories of seeing their parents kneeling in prayer together in the early morning, or having family prayer times, or even small remarks by parents or grandparents saying, God willing, or I trust in God that such and such will happen, or God will do this for us. I have been praying for this. Singing hymns, singing spiritual songs. So having that constant of prayer in the life of Irish Catholics was essential for their hope to continue on in their trials, and it kept them afloat even in these horrible, terrible circumstances. Spirituality also meant an awareness of the closeness of heaven. Recall the Irish proverb that we heard from the first part of our pilgrimage. God's closeness, right? That heaven is just 3 feet away from this realm, right? That Irish saying. But when we're in thin places, in those special sacred places, we can sense that heaven is even closer to us. And in reality, the Catholic faith teaches that that heaven, that the communion of saints is incredibly close to us, is so close to us that we could not even fathom it. And so having that awareness is so important for us to learn from our ancestors, to continue on in hope, no matter what circumstances we find ourselves in, to have that continual maintenance of an awareness of God's presence, an awareness. And even, even if perhaps if you're listening to this program, you might say, I don't believe in God. we can see that our ancestors had something, that they had something that gave them a strong hope to continue, that might cause us to think, to pause and say, what is it that they had that I need to learn, that I need to develop, that I need to grow in? This brings us to our jewel for the journey, which is our tradition to give you a jewel, a spiritual gem that you can reflect on throughout the week. And this week we want to give you an Irish proverb. It is, hope is the physician of each misery. So I pray for you listening to this, that you will continue to grow in hope, to find and discover that hope of our ancestors that kept them going, that it wasn't an empty hope, but it was a strong and a vital hope that they would like for us to have as well. I invite you to visit our website, pilgrimcenterofhope.org, to learn more about Pilgrim Center of Hope and our ministry of pilgrimages, conferences, and outreach. Fellow pilgrims, let us strive to live each day with love, faith, courage, and hope. Until next time, may God bless you. Safe travels.